So this is the first of 4 talks in a series on gateways to the freedom of a deeper reality. And the Buddha taught that there are 3 gateways to the freedom of a deeper reality. And these gateways open when we turn towards and contemplate our experience of impermanence, suffering, and insubstantiality. In Buddhism, impermanence, suffering, and insubstantiality are known as the lakshanas, the 3 characteristics of our usual existence. And when we experience moments of impermanence, suffering, and insubstantiality, 3 potential gateways open to a deeper reality. The gateways of the signless, of the wishless, and of emptiness. So during this talk this evening and in the following 2 sessions, I will be giving you my reflections on each of the 3 characteristics and their signless, wishless, and emptiness gateways. And in the final 4th session, I will reflect upon a 4th gateway, the gateway to a deeper reality of beauty. So this evening, I'm talking about impermanence and its signless gateway. So impermanence in its Sanskrit original is anicca, and signless in its Sanskrit original is animitta, and I'll come back to that later. But I'm going to start in an unusual place for a Dharma talk. I'm going to start in the pages of the Financial Times, Britain's premier daily source for economic and financial news. But in its apparently dry and characteristically pink pages are some hidden gems. And one such gem is an article by a journalist called Jemima Kelly entitled Sakura Season and the Art of Savoring. So Sakura season is the spring season of cherry blossoms in Japan. And some of you I know will remember that Sakura is also the name of the Buddhist shop on Monmouth Street in London where Sangharakshita held the very first Triratna classes. So as Jemima Kelly puts it, how to savor the beauty of the cherry blossoms, a beauty that lies in their ephemerality, a beauty that holds a mirror to the ephemerality of our own existence. Nowadays, she comments, many respond to Sakura by trying to record the cherry blossoms on their phone. It's as if they don't really see the falling blossoms unless it is posted on social media. But as she writes, there is a difference between capturing a moment and savoring it. For her, capturing a moment is an attempt to make permanent something that is inherently fleeting. We are trying to freeze a moment in time. For Jemima Kelly, savoring a moment involves paying attention to a particularly gratifying or pleasurable event and feeling, perhaps even luxuriating in it, staying with it in the flow of the moment, but then letting it go. And 2 poets, one English and one Scottish, understood this vital difference between capturing and savouring. So William Blake, the English poet and mystic, wrote this: "He who binds to himself a joy doth the winged life destroy, but he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise." And in his poem Tam O'Shanter, Scotsman Robbie Burns wrote this: "But pleasures are like poppies spread. You seize the flower, its bloom is shed. Or like the snow falls in the river, a moment white, then melts forever. Or like the borealis race that flit ere you can point their place. Or like the rainbow's lovely form, evanishing amid the storm." I love that word, evanishing. I'd never heard it before. It reminds me of words written by the Tibetan Buddhist teacher Tsongkhapa. "This life you must know as the tiny splash of a raindrop, a thing of beauty that disappears even as it comes into being." So there's a very important Dharma teaching contained in these poetic observations. The Buddha taught that in dependence upon a pleasant feeling arises craving and grasping, a desire to hold on to the object giving the pleasant feeling. In Jemima Kelly's terms, this is capturing. Another term we might use is clenching or grasping. And because of this, it might be thought that for serious practitioners of Buddhism, any form of pleasant feeling is to be treated with caution or even avoided. But the Buddha taught, with mindfulness, it is possible to fully experience pleasure without the automatic triggering of craving and grasping, without seeking to capture or clench. And in their poetry, the enlightened followers of the Buddha showed that they were able to find pleasure in nature without falling victim to craving and grasping. So Mahakashyapa was one of the Buddha's leading disciples, a renowned, even a fierce ascetic, and yet he uttered these words: "Strung with garlands of flowering vines, this patch of earth delights the mind. The lovely calls of elephants sound, these rocky crags do please me so." Mahakashyapa delighted in nature, and appreciation of the transience of the moment gave Mahakashyapa a wider perspective to the pleasure of the moment. In Jemima Kelly's terms, this is savouring. This is something with the practice of mindful attention we can learn to do, to seek to emulate Mahakashyapa. But as Jemima Kelly reminds us, this isn't just about bringing attention to pleasurable or happy moments and ignoring or avoiding the difficult ones. As she writes, there is a kind of beauty and intensity to melancholy and heartache that can be savoured in a way that can bring richness, even if it does not bring unbridled joy. After all, a central part of the symbolism of the sakura, of the cherry blossom, is the way it symbolizes the cycle of life and death, budding, blooming, and then the final fall. But we seem to have become uncomfortable with death and impermanence. It's as if the passing of time slips away from our consciousness. And the American poet Kay Ryan, in her poem The Niagara River, warns us about this. So this is The Niagara River by Kay Ryan. As though the river were a floor, we position our table and chairs upon it, eat, and have conversation. As it moves along, we notice, as calmly as though dining room paintings were being replaced, the changing scenes along the shore. We do know this is the Niagara River, but it is hard to remember what that means. And if you've ever been to the Niagara Falls, you know what it means. So, I mentioned earlier that the characteristic of impermanence is a translation of the Sanskrit original word anicca. And scholar Andrew Olensky gives us other translations of anicca from the usual one of impermanence. He suggests inconstant and unstable. Because we expect things not to change, because almost unnoticed, we get used to things being the way they are. Because we believe things will stay constant and stable, sometimes we can be shaken in unexpected ways. So let me give you two personal examples of this happening to me. First example. In 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. And ever since it was built in 1963, when I was 15 years old and studying German language, I had hated its brutal existence. I railed and campaigned against everything it represented. But when, totally unexpectedly, the wall came down in 1989, it left a hole in my experience. A fixture in my life suddenly vanished. I felt bereft. Unexpectedly, I had lost something I depended on. How could I miss something I hated? So that's the first example. In 1989, I had not yet found Buddhism, and that changed in 1994 when I stumbled into a meditation class in Sheffield. And you might think that surely being engrossed in the Buddhist teachings on impermanence, I would not be so easily caught again. Not true. So, second example. I have never been a monarchist or a supporter of the British royal family. I'm a Republican. Nevertheless, the death of Queen Elizabeth in 2022 left another unexpected hole in my experience of life. Rationally, I knew that a 96-year-old woman could not last forever. Unlike the collapse of the Berlin Wall, her death would not be unexpected. But almost unnoticed, she had become an everyday part of the fabric of my life. From my first conscious memories as a young boy in the early 1950s, she was always there. But when, entirely predictably, she was no longer there, a gap appeared in my life, a confusing sense of loss. How could I miss something that I did not particularly care about? By then, I may have studied and practiced the Buddha's teachings for 30 years, but I needed to be shaken and reminded that life is inconstant and unstable. And because life is unstable, things get broken. And it's then when we really discover what they are and what they mean to us. So writer Joshua Rothman reminds us that the German philosopher Martin Heidegger argued that there were two ways we could relate to objects. Heidegger took the example of a doorknob, and he thought that a doorknob could be ready to hand. Something, he said, we reach for and use reflexively unconsciously, without a moment's thought. But he went on, that same doorknob, if it breaks, can become present at hand. Something, he said, we reach for precisely because it's not working. We notice it, examine it, try to figure out so we can fix it. So prompted by something that is broken, our attention can shift outwards or inwards. So Joshua Rothman suggests, for example, that if you find your smartphone suddenly feels outdated, you might start reading about the idea and the implications of planned obsolescence. You turn outwards to express rebellion against such waste. But brokenness can also push attention inward. You might start to question your own consumerism, your own tendency to crave and grasp after the latest new thing. Just as observing falling cherry blossoms can lead to reflections on the ephemerality of our own lives. So broken things are often there for us in ways that working things are not. They can prompt a questioning of our habits, of how we live our lives, and even lead to a deeper search for meaning. They can open the gateway to a deeper reality we call the signless, or animita in its Sanskrit original. So in Sanskrit, nimitta means sign, or name, or label, or word, or concept. And in front of the word nimitta is a negative prefix in Sanskrit. So animita means without sign, or name, or label, or word, or concept. Animita, the signless, conjures up a sense of a wordless experience, an experience that goes beyond words and concepts, that can't be grasped or fixed by labels or words. Now, we live in a world necessarily dominated by words or signs. Without attaching words or labels to things or phenomena or people, we could not really live our lives as we do. But the problem comes when we limit our understanding of things just to those labels. When we label or name things, we fix them as if they were unchanging, separately existing subjects or objects. We don't see them in their fullness and depth. We don't see the deeper reality beyond the label. We mistake a conventionally useful and necessary linguistic device for the true nature of the phenomena or the thing. If we could see them in their fullness, then we could break through to the deeper reality of awakening. But just to reiterate, I'm not saying that signs or words can be dispensed with. Sangharakshita reminds us of the advice of Ashvaghosha. We use words to get free from words until we reach the pure wordless essence. So it's essential to study the words and concepts of the Dharma if we are to be guided to a wordless awakening or a signless awakening. And in meditation, we can learn to move from words and labels to a wordless experience. So let me give you an example. If in meditation I decide to pay particular attention to the sounds I can hear, what happens? Usually the first thing that happens is a tendency to give the sound a label of recognition. Let's say it's the sound of a motorcycle. And the motorcycle label, for me, is then often quickly followed with a commentary of words. The character of the commentary is very much dependent on my reaction to the sound of the motorcycle. Do I find that sound pleasant or unpleasant? Perhaps I like motorcycles and find the sound pleasant, so the commentary is positive. I might speculate on the make of the motorcycle and the size of its engine. But if I don't like the sound of the motorcycle, especially when I'm trying to meditate, then the experience can be unpleasant and the commentary can tend to negativity, even anger, a stream of unspoken, unpleasant words. So if we are mindful and paying attention, we get used to seeing these processes at work. We can see how our mind habitually uses labels and words to categorize our experience of sounds. We can see how an associated pleasant feeling can lead to craving and grasping, and how an associated unpleasant feeling leads to a pushing away, and how both types of feelings lead to a proliferation of words and commentary. So using mindfulness, we see how our mind habitually works in response to a sense stimulus like sounds. And this is a vital step in our practice. Because if we can then let go of the labeling and the commentary, if we can create a space in which we are no longer automatically conditioned by the feelings of pleasantness or unpleasantness, we can then simply and fully hear the richly modulating and changing sound as it passes through our experience. And what is true for meditation is potentially true for any sense contact that happens in everyday life. So, for example, I often notice in myself the tendency for an experience in nature, such as a sunset, to be accompanied by a semi-conscious running commentary in my mind. It's as if I can't let go of words. I have to mindfully try and let go of words. So the process of labeling, of capturing something or trying to fix something with a word or collection of words becomes a grasping, a desire in some ways to control what is happening, instead of allowing ourselves to be part of something much bigger, something much more. We instead strengthen the hold of the ego. So I'm going to shift context now to music and the composition of music. So I'm going to talk about the Signless, in particular relating to the music and the art of composition of the Estonian composer Arvo Pärt. Keturaju mentioned that I've lived for 20 years until recently in Estonia, and Arvo Pärt is a very important figure in Estonian life. And reflecting on his music offers, I think, some revealing reflections. So Arvo Pärt spent years in Estonia learning the complex technicalities of composing music. And yet, many of his most liked compositions are simple. So simple that on one occasion he remembers the players and the singers had great difficulty in relating to what was there before them on paper and performing what was written. They couldn't handle the simplicity. Nevertheless, despite the absence of the usual directions and complexity, his music moves people to an extent that they find difficult to express in words. One music reviewer wrote this: "Because the pieces are so simple, there is some grumbling in classical music circles about Arvo Pärt's work. He's not serious, he's conservative, etc. I didn't care about any of this when I first heard these recordings, and I still don't. Part's compositions split me open like I was an oyster. And the way they did it was by exploiting the simple harmonies of ancient Western music, the kind of dignity and stateliness that I associated with the music of the church as I first heard it. I can't fully explain what it is about this simplicity and tonality that was so moving to me, and I'm not sure I want to. And another reviewer describes the impact of a concert in New York. In this modern day and age, we shy away from discussing certain topics such as religion. Arvo Part practices Orthodox Eastern Christianity. So the reviewer goes on. Arvo Part continues to speak about it for us in his music. What is most significant is that he does it without an agenda, without being pushy, often even without words, yet the meaning remains clear. Transcendence is possible, despite the fact that the shape it takes varies from individual to individual. Tonight, the chances are that we all at this concert experienced our own form of spiritual enlightenment, and not one walked away feeling indifferent. And where does this power to give people a glimpse of the transcendental come from for Arvo Part? It comes out of a wordless silence. Describing the process that encompasses both the signless and the emptiness gateways, Arvo Part says this of one of his major creations entitled Te Deum. I had to draw this music gently out of silence and emptiness. I had to draw this music gently out of silence and emptiness. And from interviews with Arvo Part, the professor of theology, Peter Butanov, writes this. The composer, Arvo Part, sees himself as a midwife, birthing a living being out of the womb of quietness. The Te Deum belies just such a process. It begins nearly imperceptibly and ends almost as gently. But in this work, as with other compositions by Arvo Part, the genesis in silence characterizes the whole through hushed and loud passages, simple and busy ones. As Arvo Part said in an interview over 25 years ago, before one says something, perhaps it is better to say nothing. My music has emerged only after I have been silent for quite some time. Literally silent. For me, silent means the nothing from which God created the world. So I'd like to add a final reflection on the signless or the wordless from another very different musician. That's Nick Cave. We're shifting very sharply in the kind of music. But as you may be aware, some years ago, Nick Cave's son, Arthur, tragically died. And in an interview, Nick Cave tells of the first occasion when he ventured outside into a public setting after Arthur's death. This is his description. There's a vegetarian takeaway place in Brighton called Infinity, where I would eat sometimes. I went there the first time I'd gone out in public after Arthur had died. There was a woman who worked there, and I was always friendly with her, just the normal pleasantries, but I liked her. I was standing in the queue and she asked me what I wanted, and it felt a little strange because there was no acknowledgement of anything. She treated me like anyone else, matter-of-factly, professionally. She gave me my food and I gave her the money. And sorry, it's quite hard to talk about this. As she gave me back my change, she squeezed my hand purposefully. As she gave me back my change, she squeezed my hand purposefully. And Nick Cave goes on. It was such a quiet act of kindness. The simplest and most articulate of gestures, but at the same time, it meant more than all that anybody had tried to tell me, because of the failure of language in the face of catastrophe. She wished the best for me in that moment. There was something truly moving to me about that simple, wordless act of compassion. So out of the gateway of the signless came compassion. And I'll finish there. So, we've got time for discussion or questions or comments.
What would be a gentle way to start kind of practicing with impermanence? Because I feel, for me, even the word is like, so I guess I would need a gentle entry into practice like that. But yeah.
What would be a gentle, good introduction to practice?
But in the practice, talking is helpful, but like kind of how to bring it into practice gently. Okay.
Well, for me, the first way that I learnt to practice awareness of impermanence and change was in meditation. So it might be, for example, just focusing attention on sensations in the body and just listening to what is happening in the body and just watching and then noticing how there's sort of like a kaleidoscope of change always taking place. Sensations shifting from one place to another. So it's quite a small thing. Maybe we talk about when we follow the breath. You can notice how there are always small but significant changes taking place in the breath. So it's just getting used to things on a small scale and seeing that happening all the time in meditation and then carrying that with us in everyday life. And I remember I remember thinking, is that it? That's a pretty small thing, but actually it's really significant. Just to continually being able to notice the changing flow of experience in meditation, whatever it is that you're focusing your attention on. That for me was what worked and helped a lot. Yeah. Yes, Dharma.
Sort of following on from that, I'm thinking, which would you emphasize as a practice? Noticing the impermanence, how everything in meditation keeps changing, or sort of looking out for the opposite of the signless. Would that be a mistake to try and seek?
No, I think so. The reason I talked about Arvo Part's music, for example, is because listening to his music, I enter a space, a wordless or signless space, in which there's no commentary. I'm just absorbed in those changing sounds. So that's actually actively encouraging myself to experience something wordless and signless in that way. And again, I mean, in nature, sort of, sometimes it comes upon you, doesn't it, that you get a sense of, or you have some sort of experience that you can't put into words. And the minute that you try to put it into words, you can actually destroy the experience. Or sometimes for me, I listen to a poem. And maybe I don't understand all the nuances and language in the poem, but something happens. Something that goes beyond words. Something beyond words is there in the experience for me. So if I'm listening to poetry, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for analysing it. I'm looking to sort of open myself to accepting the poem and letting it have an experience that lifts me out of the ordinary, beyond words and concepts. So there are different ways, I think, that you can actively seek that. And there's something, but I mean, I think there's something quite, what's the word, uplifting about allowing and looking for those signless or wordless moments to arise. And it's an alternative to actually consciously tracking change. It's a different way of looking at things, for me anyway. And those moments are very powerful. Very powerful. And I don't want to put them into words and analyse them. I'm lifted out of myself. That can happen sometimes. Yeah. Maybe sometimes reading something also can do it. Even though it's words, something can happen. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. Are you convinced or not?
Oh no, as you talk, I'm looking at you with more and more relaxedness.
Okay,
in my eyes.
good.
And I start to notice the size of our cranium. And how we've evolved with.
Yeah. Don't analyse it. Just experience it. Yeah. Yeah. It's good. There was somebody else, I think. Yeah.
Could you just give the definition? You went through the different ways that nimitta is translated.
Yes.
Would you mind just saying them again, please?
So animitta.
The nimitta.
Yeah.
You said sign, but you gave several different.
There was. Okay. Yeah. Let me just see if I can remind myself of that. Turn to that. Yeah. So we usually translate animitta. Anicca is inconstant, unstable. Animitta, so wordless, signless. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, so it means without a sign or name or label or word or concept. But it conjures up a sense of a wordless experience, an experience that goes beyond words and concepts. So you can define it as without sign or name or label or word or concept, but it's conjuring up this sense of a wordless or signless experience. So you can't grasp the experience in words or concepts.
Okay, so can I ask another question?
Yeah, carry on.
I've got a friend who says that she doesn't think in word form. She thinks, you know, she has images, pictures
Mhm.
in her mind.
Yeah.
So, would that still be a nimitta? I'm just curious, because I mean, whenever she said it, I thought, gosh.
I don't know.
I mean, she does use words because she speaks. But she's trying to convey something to me that.
Well, I suppose you can use images. You could use images in a sense like a photo, couldn't you? And you fix something in the terms of an image. So, like what Jemima Kelly was talking about was people using cameras to fix the moment and then sharing it on social media. So you could imagine sort of like images could be like that. But on the other hand, if they're coming and going and evolving and flowing, then that's a very different experience, isn't it? And maybe they lead somewhere that unexpected. So it depends. Depends, but you could imagine that images could be just like a set of photos, which are fixed in certain ways.
So they could be analogous to the nimitta.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
not.
or not. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, Dhamachandra.
Could you say more about how we can compare in our minds in terms of teachings between impermanence and letting go of wanting to control all of the conditions in our experience, i.e. conditioned co-production, letting go of the expectation that things are fixed and permanent? Is that basically, it's the same, isn't it? That's the same way of thinking, letting go of. So
Yes.
it's more about letting go of expectations.
Yes.
I can control, or that the world is going to be the way I want it to be.
When it comes to controlling, I think this overlaps with what I'll talk about next week with the wishless, because wishing to control things is the opposite of letting go, which is what I'm talking about in relation to the wishless. But when it comes to conditioned co-production and Pratitya-samutpada, the things arise in dependence upon conditions, change in dependence upon conditions, and disappear or die in dependence upon conditions. Then understanding that, using the words and concepts of the Buddha's teachings of conditioned co-production, can help us to understand and can maybe turn us towards our experience of life and what happens in life and see it in a different way. Begin to penetrate, using those words and concepts to go deeper to a wordless experience. So the Buddha's teachings of impermanence and dependent arising or conditioned co-production, they go very much together in my mind, very much together. When conditions change, things change, and so on. So being aware of that broader teaching, that fundamental teaching by the Buddha, is a really important set of words and concepts that we can use to help eventually to let go of wishing to grasp or control or fix. Yeah. Is that what you were hinting? Yeah, yeah.
So of course we can then watch out for wordless or non-conceptual evidence
Yes.
of this
Yeah. Yeah.
the playing out of
Yeah.
conditions.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you.
Hridayamani again. No talking about bald heads. That's an example of change, by the way. Over a long time.
This has been a signless question for you. You're already answering. I understand my question.
We're telepathic. Go on.
I noticed you changed the vocabulary to what I was expecting regarding the door, through the door to, in the old days I heard of it as being to liberation, through the door to liberation. And you didn't say that. You said the door to a greater sense of experience of liberation.
A deeper sense of reality that comes, the freedom that comes with a deeper sense of reality.
What I'm asking is, you didn't use the extreme language of the door to liberation. You said the door to sort of
well,
liberation.
Well, I have to say it's sort of like, because when you look at writings and talks about the three characteristics, the three lakshanas and the three gateways, the moksha mukhas, it's gateways to freedom, gateways to liberation that are often there. So I wanted something a little bit different. So I talked about actually opening the door to the freedom of a deeper reality, of experiencing a deeper reality, which is also what it's about. But it was a conscious attempt to sort of to move away from the usual way of describing things. Yeah. But it's not inconsistent with the usual way of describing things. Yeah. Okay.